everybody. I'd like to call our very first Abolition Hall Steering Committee to order. This is really exciting. This is the date, Monday, July 29th, beginning right at 7 p.m. We're here at Whitemarsh Township at the conference room, and we're also live through Zoom so that we really have an opportunity for the public to be engaged. Is there anybody in the Zoom as of now?
Yep. Pat Smith, Tom Blumstrom, and WTV.
Wonderful. Okay. Hey, Tom. Awesome. Okay. My name's Laura Boyle-Nestor. I'm the chair of the steering committee. I just came off of being on the board of supervisors, so my name might be familiar. But we're going to start some introductions. Now, I just want to start by saying this is the beginning of this process. There are more meetings to come. There's a lot of conversation that we're going to have about the whole process. That's what this is all about. That's what a steering committee is about. So tonight we're going to just kind of have our first introduction to this whole process. We're going to go through some of the history and understand how we got here. But if we can do some introductions so we can all get to know each other. First, I guess the committee first. So I can close at the end a little bit, but if the committee can share a little bit about your name and why you're wanting to be part of the committee, that would be helpful. Dana, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Dana Dorsey. I'm a resident of Whitemarsh Township. I live here with my husband and two boys that go to Whitemarsh Elementary and Colonial Middle, or he's starting in the high school in the fall. And I'm the executive director at the Highlands Mansion and Gardens in Fort Washington. I've lived there and worked there for 11 years. I'm passionate about the history of this area, and this opportunity sounded like a wonderful thing to be a part of, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone on the committee for the best interest of the property and honoring its history.
Thanks, Dana. Darren?
Sure. Hi, my name is Darren Sudman. I live in Plymouth Meeting. Been here for about 23 years. My kids both went up through the school district. My daughter's in Indiana. My son's about to start James Madison University. Professionally, I work with companies on corporate social responsibility and nonprofits on mission and impact. My wife and I started a nonprofit here locally about 20 years ago called Simon's Heart when our son Simon passed away. We've been providing free heart screenings for students, placing AED devices, teaching kids how to do chest compressions. So I'm excited to be here because my professional path of starting as a lawyer and then doing nonprofit work, and then personally being on a journey and being a part of a group called White Men for Racial Justice, all kind of culminates and gets me really excited to be able to apply my skill sets, but also my interest in making sure that the right story is told, and that the community embraces that part of our history that so often doesn't get taught and gets overlooked.
Good evening. My name is Edmund Shin. I am a resident of Whitemarsh Township. Live here with my family. I am also involved with the Highlands Historical Society. I am an attorney. I like to look at situations that are seemingly complex and try to figure out solutions that are creative, that take into account all the different viewpoints. I like to build consensus. I look at this as an interesting project. I think it's going to be a challenging project, but an exciting one. And I think that, my goal as a committee member is to lend my expertise, hear the concerns of the people in the audience, and try to fulfill, I think, what was set out to be a noble mission to save the property, to honor the legacy of Mr. Karabots, and to create a space that pays homage to the people that came before us. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Deb?
I guess that leaves me. I'm Deborah Lukens. I am probably the oldest of the board here. I'm a resident of Whitemarsh all my life. So when you ask what am I doing here, I've seen so many changes, some good, some bad, but it's a wonderful place. I went all through the colonial school system. Both of my daughters did. I was, for those of you that are Whitemarsh residents, your local judge for the last 30 years. I retired in December. So I'm here to help negotiate, to put my history and expertise everywhere we can so we can all figure this project out and get it moving.
Thank you. Laura Boyle-Nestor. I am a resident since '96 to Whitemarsh Township, and I've had an interest in the history, the rich history we have here since we moved here. And I've raised my 2 kids, my stepson in the area. I've been on the Board of Supervisors for the past 8 years, and I've been involved in the evolution of this particular project, so I am honored to be able to continue to be a part of this process and surround myself with wonderful people to continue. We do have some liaisons with us here tonight too. So we have township staff. We have J.C. Toll, who's current Board of Supervisor and our liaison back to the board, because that is what this committee does, is report back to the Township Board of Supervisors. And Craig is our township manager. John Walco is our solicitor from our solicitor's office, and he's been intimately involved in the project, and so he'll be helping us understand some of that tonight. We have Bob Downs here, who's representing the Karabots Foundation, the Karabots family. Tom Blomstrom is through Zoom, and he's our Director of Park and Rec, and he's been the liaison with Art Center. And we have Dan Zwaina and Michael here from the Art Center, which is great. Thank you. And we also are excited to have Roy Wilson and Ann that are representing the Corson family and be able to speak a little bit tonight about the history of that particular property from a personal standpoint. So that's the introduction of our committee. Any questions right now? Okay, let's keep moving along. So Roy, would you mind sharing a bit first about the history? That would be great. Is that okay if he's up here?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Good to be able to hear.
My name is Roy Wilson. My wife Ann and I lived at the Corson homestead for more than 40 years. We used Abolition Hall as our painting and sculpture studios during all that time. While working to maintain the property, I gave tours and lectures in Abolition Hall to anyone who requested it, both to individuals and large groups. The ancestral home on the corner of Germantown and Butler in Plymouth Meeting dates back to 1767, when the family witnessed the passage of both Patriot and British forces moving down Germantown Pike during the Revolutionary War. But it is in the decades leading up to the Civil War for which this site is most significant. At a time when America was grappling with the question of whether a free society would allow slavery to coexist with the concept of all men are created equal, the Mosby and Corson families living here in Plymouth Meeting were active participants in the cause of abolition, the anti-slavery movement. They were founding members of the Plymouth Meeting Anti-Slavery Society and the Montgomery County Anti-Slavery Society. George and Martha Mosby Corson, living in the home we now refer to as the Hovenden House, were closely allied as well with anti-slavery activists in Philadelphia and elsewhere in this region. 2 of their colleagues were Quakers James Mott and Lucretia Mott. Lucretia Mott in particular was a powerful speaker both in the cause of abolition and in women's suffrage. You can't visit the Mott home today because it was torn down a century ago. This site has survived. George and Martha Corson welcomed many traveling speakers to their home to bring the word of abolition to the community. The Corson and Mosby families also held public meetings in the meeting house across the street. But this was a time when abolitionists in general were hated by many Americans, certainly by Southerners whose economic system was closely tied to slavery, but also by many Northerners, both because of racial animus, but also because abolitionists were seen as dangerous agitators, threatening to tear apart the young nation of America over the question of slavery. At a time when abolition meetings in our region were being attacked by mobs and sometimes burned down, the Quaker Meeting Hall was closed to the George Corson's meetings. So George Corson in 1856 built a meeting hall on his own farm. Then known as Anti-Slavery Hall, it was built as a second story over an existing carriage shed behind the Malsby barn. Corson wanted this to be a public venue, and he hosted speakers that espoused not only abolition, but the temperance movement. George Corson did not allow drinking on his farm, and the suffrage movement, women's right to vote. In addition to these public advocacy efforts, the home here was for many years an active stop on the Underground Railroad. Black Americans seeking to escape slavery in the South rode this imaginary railroad through a series of conductors, such as the Corsons, moving from one stop to the next to a place of safety in the North. In this work, the Corsons handed off their escapees to other conductors, some of which were free black conductors in Norristown, such as Daniel Ross. The family stories recall the Corson children sometimes coming down to breakfast to find several black men or a black family eating breakfast at the kitchen table while they rested to go on the next leg of their journey. Black historian Charles Blockson said of Abolition Hall, it was a place where slaves could be housed and cared for. One of the nationally known abolition trials was that of escaping slave Jane Johnson and her children in 1855. The story is too long to recount here, but ultimately when Jane Johnson needed to be spirited away from Philadelphia and concealed from slave catchers, she was brought here to the Corson home. In a letter to George Corson in 1855, James Mott notes that Jane Johnson's appearance in court as a witness, quote, caused no little excitement, and it was thought best to bring her away out of reach of the slave catchers as they threatened to take her up. For this reason, we send her to thee. And he goes on to write, we don't know what her enemies may do if they should know her whereabouts. In discussing this celebrated case in his book, The Underground Railroad, William Still, the prominent black leader in the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society, notes that George Corson, as one of Jane Johnson's escorts after the trial, was, quote, one of our most manly and intrepid police officers, and thus escorted, she was taken back in safety to the house from which she was brought. That was here to George Corson's home. George Corson was a small man and died of consumption in 1860. One of his last acts was to make another donation of personal funds to the Anti-Slavery Society. His obituary in the Anti-Slavery Standard in New York on November 24th, 1860 noted, and this is a long quote, there are many who are more widely known, but it falls to the lot of few in private life to be more sincerely loved. Gentle to the erring and full of pity for the outcast, he had but little to say about religion. He showed his appreciation of it by deeds rather than words. George Corson was a consistent abolitionist and one of the most efficient in our cause. A member of the Pennsylvania Society from its origin, he was to the last one of its most cordial and ungrudging supporters. The memory of one so good could not fail to incite those who loved him to emulate his virtues, end quote. During the Civil War, many Malsby and Corson family members served the Union as doctors and surgeons. The Civil War was such a titanic struggle that much of the evidence of the Underground Railroad was washed away in the tide of national exhaustion after the war. One of George and Martha's children was Helen Corson, who trained as an artist in Philadelphia and subsequently in the 1870s studied art in France. There she met her husband-to-be, the painter Thomas Hovenden, an Irish orphan whose patrons had also enabled him to study in France. They married and moved back into Helen's family home here in Plymouth Meeting in the early 1880s. Hovenden was inspired by the aura left by the abolitionist spirit of his new home in Plymouth Meeting. He was already an accomplished artist when he arrived in Plymouth Meeting, and he embarked on one of his iconic paintings, The Last Moments of John Brown, in 1882. He researched his subject carefully, but the painting is an allegorical one. It depicts John Brown being led to the gallows in 1859, surrounded by U.S. Army soldiers, disdainful Southerners, and a black woman holding up her baby as if to be blessed by the Messiah. Now hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the painting was widely praised at the time and is often found in history books as an iconic image of the anti-slavery movement. Hovenden loved his Plymouth Meeting home here, his wife's ancient home, as he called it, and he loved his American citizenship. Thomas Hovenden became a nationally known artist and painted many important works, including In the Hands of the Enemy in 1889, depicting a Confederate soldier wounded after the Battle of Gettysburg, being cared for in the home of a Union family. One of his most famous paintings is here in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Breaking Home Ties, dated 1890, depicts a young man preparing to leave his family home to go off into the world. At a time when the rural traditions of America were being absorbed into the urban industrial landscape, this painting created a sensation around the country when it was exhibited at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. The central focus of the painting is the mother holding onto her young son's arms, perhaps for the last time, as he prepares to leave. The painting was so popular, it was reproduced nationwide, and Hovenden was inundated with requests from publishers and etchers to make reproductions of the work. In addition to his more famous works, Hovenden painted many scenes of black families and domestic life. At a time when some artists were depicting black Americans in a less than flattering light, Hovenden, as well as his colleague Thomas Akins, painted black subjects in a generally respectful manner. Hovenden's painting, Bringing Home the Bride, showing a white family welcoming the new bride into the family, as a companion painting titled Their Pride, depicting a black family as the daughter is dressed in her wedding gown. Hovenden was heroically killed in a train accident just down the road from his home in 1895. So Hovenden's daughter, Martha, pursued a career in sculpture, also using the first floor of Abolition Hall as her sculpture studio, as I did. Her best known work is a stone tablet for the Washington Memorial Chapel in Valley Forge. The Malsby Barn was reconstructed into a family home in 1952 in the form as you see it today from Butler Pike. Abolition Hall, behind the Malsby Barn, remains substantially as it was, evoking the spirit of those who came before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here and for the summary. That was perfect. You know, it's so rich, so much detail, so many people. So important to. I know. You did a great job. And there'll be more chances to share more detail as we evolve with this group. But you know, history is so important to not forget and remember. It helps us shape who we are. So thank you for that. Any questions for Roy at the moment? Yes.
This is also just a comment on that letter from James on George Corson, his Whitemarsh treasurer. I hope at some point in the future, the public can see that.
Thank you. Okay, so how is it that we're here today talking about this? To get into that layer of detail, I'm gonna ask for help with the township. Solicitor John, do you wanna kind of walk us through?
I'm able to talk about, I think, the good things.
Yeah.
When the township first attempted to bid on the property, I've been out with the firm during the threat of development that was sort of underlying this, and which really made the whole process just so much more fortunate, so much more special. So I'm going to speak when the property came back on the market.
Perfect.
After I know many people were aware of the numerous hearings, conditional use hearings that were involved in this. That's the history. Where I think the Township Solicitor's Office most recently became involved is when there was a solicitation for bids placed on the property to see if anyone wanted to provide the highest bid to purchase the property. The township had the property appraised, and under the applicable township codes, the township can't pay more than what our appraisal says the property is worth. And you think about that, that's a good rule. Otherwise, you know, it's your taxpayer dollars that are using this, and you can't overpay for a property. So we did, as the township, submit the highest appraised value that we had for the property. And that was submitted with the intent of using Act 153 open space funds to eventually make that purchase. We put in the bid. Unfortunately, we were outbid significantly, and therefore we did not get the purchase. But fortunately, the highest bidder at that time was Nicholas Karabots. And almost immediately, he began discussions with the township about how the property could be preserved, and how the open space could be preserved, how the historical nature of the property could be preserved, and how the property can be made open to the public. And ultimately, it was determined that with the Karabots contribution and the township's contribution, we could enter together and proceed with the purchase of that property. Unfortunately, I think a couple months thereafter, Mr. Karabots sadly did pass away. But fortunately, his wife and his children were willing to continue on with the essentially just a verbal understanding that Mr. Karabots had made at that time, and proceed through the Karabots Foundation, which is represented by Mr. Bob Downs. So Bob, if I say anything, then feel free. So we had the Karabots Foundation's pledge of money, but we needed a partner to receive that money, a nonprofit that'd be willing to work with the township, that had the same sort of goals and desires, and really would satisfy the Karabots' desires with a particular interest in creating programming curriculums for that focus on the need of underserved and disadvantaged youths. And it was discussed and thought, well, what about the Whitemarsh Art Center? They're local to the township. They're able to offer those types of public goods and services that the Karabots were seeking. And obviously, the property has a historic significance in the art community. And it was believed that they needed an area in the township that they can grow and excel, so they could grow their programs and curriculums, just be grow in what they can give to the township. And we were fortunate enough that they were willing to receive that donation that was made by the Karabots for the purposes of acquiring this property. So the Art Foundation, the Karabots Foundation, and the township are now the three parties that really moved this forward, purchased the properties, were able to close on the properties, and as part of that closing, when you give millions of dollars to somebody, it's common to enter into a gift agreement or a grant agreement. And the grant agreement that the parties entered into essentially says that the purpose of the Art Center in the township is to really provide an opportunity for the Art Center to expand its class offerings and broaden its curriculum to better serve the public, with a particular focus on serving the needs of underserved and disadvantaged youths. There are, we all know, if you've been to the property, there are different structures on the property. There's the open space, and the agreement says the open space, it's got to remain open space, which it has to anyways because we purchased it with the Act free funds. There's what we call the main house that's adjacent to the Abolition Hall. The intent was that the main house and surrounding areas would be used by either the township or the Art Center for public meeting spaces for educational and Art Center programs. There was the Hovenden House on the corner. It was intended that that would be used, and it will be used by the Art Center to use as a sort of say administrative offices, have some classes in there, sort of run out of the Hovenden House, in addition to maybe have some gallery spaces and some class offerings. There's the Maple Lane House, which is part of the property, although it doesn't have historical relevance. It's all understood that that house is occupied. Eventually, maybe we could subdivide that, sell that, and use that money to benefit the development of the property and its preservation. But for the whole process, the township, the Art Center, the Karabots Foundation have always recognized that Abolition Hall is particularly special on, it's the crown jewel on all of the other properties. The whole property is special, but that's a little bit extra special because of its architectural and historical relevance. And the grant agreement in the township knew that it should be preserved in the spirit of its original use of a public gathering and meeting space. But the township thought it best to not make the determination as to exactly how that property will be used, and that there should be an open process with public feedback to figure out how that property and how the entire property, but particularly how Abolition Hall can be used, should be used, and how do we get there, financially speaking. Obviously, it's an old house. Obviously, it's not to code, and things need to be done in order to make it a special place that maintains the historic and architectural relevancy, but still is a great meeting place nowadays. So that's, I think, what really turned into the idea of forming the committee to help provide the thoughts of, well, how are we going to get to that next phase? We have it. Work needs to be done. Ideas need to be done. We have the partnership. We have our partners. We have our benefactors. But we need to use the property to be in line with the grant agreement to make these offerings to the public. And it's going to take time. It's going to take money to get there. So and here we are.
Thank you. Any questions anybody have about the process? Ken?
Yes, I just want to make sure that I get recognized as a member of the HARP that I came to be part of. Seeing the contribution. So, what I like to do is I have the architect do a sort of renovation and the required.
Ken, do you want to stand at the mic? That might help everybody hear
We
you.
can hear you better.
What I'd like to say is the board itself will be generously looking forward to doing work with the committee. We want to be actively involved.
It's still hard to hear you, I'm sorry.
Still there? Hello?
Perfect.
There we go.
I got to start all over again.
There you go.
Don't start making jokes here. Just want to make people forward about the fact that the HARP board is looking forward to working on this project. I mean, for 20 years I've been on the HARP board, and prior to that I was on the planning commission, another 20 years. But this is the most exciting portion of this township that I think is going to be a real strong asset to the township. I don't know what else you want to know about what the HARP board is doing, but we do have a review policy. We do have a review guideline to be used. But I'd like to kind of close, get you involved with that, by looking at it and showing what the HARP board will look forward to doing work with the architect or the planning of the build, any work that needs to be done to the building that's related to any HARP board issues.
Thanks, Ken. Who is Charlie? Are you the liaison for HARP still? Okay.
Oh, Charlie's here. Well, I'm done. I'll speak later.
Yep. So just for the record, show that, Ken Parsons was sharing that he's on the HARB committee. Charlie Gutenplan is our Director of Planning and Zoning, who's here as the Township Liaison to HARB. So again, anything that happens to these properties has to go. It is obviously in the historic district. This is the historic district. Anything has to be approved by that committee. Thank you, Ken, for that. Yes, come on up.
Linda Dahl, Fairway Road. I've lived in the township for 37 years. I was back there doing the math. Such a long time. Anyway, this is all about history, honestly. Roy, he did a great job explaining the history of Abolition Hall. I'm so appreciative of all of you that are fundraisers, because from what our solicitor says, we're going to need a lot of money, so that's a great thing. So appreciative of the Karabots and the Art Center and the township for chipping in the money. But because we're talking about history, I really feel that this is nowhere in any record when anybody talks about, saving Abolition Hall. And credit needs to be given, and I'm pretty sure she's going to be mad at me, to Sidel Zove. Sidel Zove started this whole thing. He started the Friends of Abolition Hall. We've been fighting to save Abolition Hall, many of us, over 20 of us, giving funds, showing up at meetings for 5 to 7 years. And by dragging this out, this is what the developer kind of like couldn't keep going on. And, I just feel like the credit in history needs to be, none of us would be here if Sidell didn't start the Friends of Abolition Hall and we showed up at all those meetings. You know that, Laura? You know that, JC? All those meetings fighting to save Abolition Hall. And this is where it all began. And she needs so much credit. We were never invited to Friends of Abolition Hall. We're never invited to the opening ceremony of Abolition Hall. We have basically been ignored. And it is something that needs to be corrected because we would not all be sitting here now if we weren't able to drag this out and get this happening. And so everybody deserves all this credit, but you can't ignore who started the whole thing. So that's my what I have to say.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you for all the public that has been involved in, especially the Wilson family and the Karabots Foundation in getting us to where we are. Any other public comments, Sidell? I mean, we're going to keep going through here, so we're just focusing here on the grant agreement.
That's what I want to speak to.
Okay.
Sidell Zove, and I'm looking to the future and concerned about where we go from here, how we find the funds and how we develop the plan to move forward, because the plan and the vision is what's going to bring the dollars to the table. So I have carefully read the grant agreement several times. And I just would ask that Mr. Walko clarify for everyone here tonight and everyone who's listening, the focus of the efforts of this committee will be on addressing the use and renovation of the main house, also known as the Stone Barn, and Abolition Hall. Those two structures, those two buildings, to the exclusion of the Hovenden House?
Before we go there, though, I don't think it's fair to characterize what we're doing as a committee when we really haven't, we're here today to figure out how we're going to function as a committee.
Right, but I want to understand the terms of the grant agreement. That's what I want to focus on.
I mean, I think it was always assumed and agreed that the Hovenden House's uses would be exclusively used by the Arts Center.
Right.
And that wouldn't be open to the public unless the Arts Center was going to have an open gallery or classroom material there. So that was sort of used for the Arts Center to be able to expand its administrative roles, thereby freeing up money that it could use for programs that could then be used to further the Karabots' goals and missions on the property. So I think I would not anticipate that the committee would be spending too much time talking about the use of the Hovenden House for that reason. One of the other items that I did not address, because it's technically not related to acquisition of the property, but it's related to ongoing use of the property, is that right now the township and the Arts Center are still working out and really finalizing terms of a declaration of restricted covenant for the property. Mm-hmm. To really just say how we're going to work together to use this property, that we can't go around and sell it to a developer, they can't go around and sell it to a developer, who's going to pay for what, who's going to make insurance, who's going to handle the events, just how it could be coordinated. The aspect of really what's holding up, I think, the only aspect that's really holding up that from moving forward is the plan of how are we going to get this started. Mm-hmm. Because it does take money and it does take time, and the Arts Center needs, they're coming up with a plan to figure out how they're going to be able to realistically occupy that property and run their programs from that property. I don't think that this committee is going to be involved in how the Arts Center is doing that, because that's the Arts Center's business. However, it is an important aspect to work together to get that property up and running.
So under the terms of the grant agreement, as I understand it, the Arts Center is responsible for the Hovenden House and has exclusive use of the Hovenden House. But I just want to clarify, because your emphasis was on Abolition Hall, and you didn't speak to the main house, also known as the Stone Barn.
Sure.
So I just want to understand that those two structures fall within the purview of this committee.
I would say yes.
Okay.
I would say that both of those are going to be used for the public.
Okay.
And I would say also the surrounding area
Of
as
course.
well.
The
Parking
eight
lots,
acres.
the pathways, things that need to actually have those buildings be used. Now, again, it's expected in the agreement that the Art Center will have the right to use the main house for its programming. And again, that's the items that need to be worked out with this covenant. So, so to put it in the framing of how it came to your question, I think the Abolition Hall, the Art Center has, say, no right to that. Now, obviously, if they want to use it just like the public or can use it as part of the programming and it's in line with
Sure.
then yes. But the main house, I think the expectation is it'll be used more for meetings and programs by the township and through the Art Center, but not exclusively.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Thanks, Adele. And before we go further, because we're speaking of the grant agreement, that Bob Downs is here. Bob, do you want to share anything in addition to what's been said at all on regards?
I'm just going to jump in if I disagreed with anything. And John's, I think, characterized it fairly accurately.
Okay.
So,
You're good.
total agreement.
All right. Thank you for that comment and for that dialogue, because I think that is a great segue into the next part that talks about the role of the steering committee and why we're here. So I'm just going to read, which has been publicly stated, what our committee is about. The purpose, glad the air conditioner is off.
Yeah, right.
The purpose of Abolition Hall Steering Committee is to make recommendations to the Township Board of Supervisors related to the use of Abolition Hall, the main house, and the surrounding grounds, which we just talked about, to ensure long-term sustainability and public use of the buildings and grounds while preserving the rich history of the property. The steering committee will assist in planning and facilitation of the uses and operations of Abolition Hall and the main house to ensure the township's compliance with the grant agreement with the Karabots Foundation, thereby fostering recreational and educational programs for diverse groups of people, including underserved and disadvantaged youths, which is part of the grant agreement. The steering committee shall also assist the township in identifying, advancing, and promoting opportunities to secure funding to preserve, improve, and enhance Abolition Hall so the township's commitment and vision for the property can be fulfilled. So hopefully that helps shape a little bit more of why we're here. And the other part that is huge is, and it's mentioned in the grant agreement, that this is a public process. So that's another reason why we're all gathering here. And Dan had asked before the meeting started if the steering committee had a chance to tour, and they did. Thank you, Roy, for the tour for the committee so that they could see the property. Obviously critical to know what we're talking about. So everybody has seen it, and now we're in, and I think being in this building affords greater access for everybody because we can be hybrid. And if inclement weather is occurring, you know, we have AC here, it allows for greater meeting space. So as much as my heart would like us to be across the street and down, I think it's more practical for us to be here. If there are times that we need to do things down there, then we can certainly talk about that. But this is part of having this be in the public eye, which leads to the next part. We're already at 7, meetings and public engagement. And you know, just throwing this out there to everybody about what the committee would like to see, what the people here would like to see. I know, Darren, you have some particular comments about, you know, what we'd like to see more of. Does anybody want to start?
I'd just like to say something. Linda, to allay your concerns, when I was selected to this committee, right, I know Steve Kaufman from being on Open Space. And one of my first phone calls was to Sedell to talk to her about this, right? And the way that this is an open format is really because I consider myself on some levels like a scrivener, an organizer of thoughts. So like we're having these open meetings where, you know, people that were instrumental in saving the property can speak. We have the Art Center here, we've got a representative from the Karabots, we have township, it's putting all of us together I think we all share a common goal of success for the project. And I think that's the beauty of the way this committee was set up, is that we have a lot of skill sets to try to make suggestions, hear the public comments, and work towards a common solution, which is, let's get this big plane up off the ground, right? Like right now, it's just sitting on the ground and we got to launch it. So that's how I view my role in the committee. And, I just want you to know that I very much acknowledge and understand the work that was put in behind the scenes. It was a tremendous heavy lift that was often thankless. So you did it though. Congratulations, you did it. And we're here now to figure out how to implement it, and the saving has already been done. So now we just have the creative part.
I appreciate that so much. I appreciate everything you just said. My whole point wasn't about what's happening now. I think everything that's happening now is great. It's just that I'd like the history to reflect how we got here.
When I write the book on it, I'm gonna put Sidell in front of it.
Mind if I say something?
Please, Roy.
With all due respect, and I'll just lay all this out, in all due respect to the Friends of Abolition Hall. This was a property owned by the family throughout many generations. It ended up in the hands of 3 family members, only one of which, my wife, wanted to save the property and stay here. The other 2 wanted to sell it. To your comment about the value of the property, the township, for the record, I want this to be straight.
And you're correct. I agree with everything
The
you're about to
township
say.
zoned the property in the 1970s for townhouses. That's what it was worth. It was zoned for townhouses by the township. When we tried to stay here and buy out the other 2, we attempted to sell the land to the township to lower the taxes, which were gigantic, $25,000 a year. So we could save the buildings, continue doing the tours, we could have our studio, and keep everything really exactly the way it was. But just move that land to the township. The township valued it as open space. It was worth the value as townhouse development. That's what it was worth, because that's how it was zoned. The other 2 family members were never going to accept that valuation, so we had to back out. That's how it ended up going for sale. I just want that to be very clear. And the stories about town members wouldn't take the valuation. The valuation was a false valuation because it was based on the value of the land as open space, which I'm glad it is. But the township wanted it to be townhouses and taxes that way for 50 years.
Well, I think in all fairness to the township, it's an evolving process, this open space preservation. We have more open space in Whitemarsh than the surrounding townships combined, right? And that's something to be proud of, and it's a continuing effort. It's a constant evolution, it's an improvement, it's a better understanding. And I think Abolition Hall was a great case on how not to do something, right? Like, things, now we see, we learn, and I think only is going to get better. And the people at the township who are working so hard day in, day out to make this place great are doing an excellent job. Every now and again, we learn something, but we do learn. And where we are now is we preserve the property from development, which is a huge win. And now the opportunities are endless. It's how creative can we be?
Just want the record to be straight. There's nobody that cares more about this property than the 2 people sitting up there.
If I can just piggyback off of what Ed's saying and what I feel like everyone has a piece in this, and everyone, like as Ed said, we all want what's best for our community and what's best for the property, and to highlight and remember the property for what it was. And as a person that came into the Highlands, before I moved to the area, I didn't know the Highlands. And my #1 goal was to respect, there was a couple that knew everything about the Highlands. So it was to deep dive in and learn as much as possible so that they were respected and the people that came before them were. So I think this is a very similar project where there is nobody here that knows the property better than you. So we need to learn from you and respect the people that came before. And I do think, even though if you can feel the tension in the room, I do think we're all on board with honoring everyone that's involved and having the right story shared.
Yes.
That's my hope.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, do you want to stand up? If you don't mind sharing your name.
Sure.
My name is Bill Reed. I live in Plymouth Meeting. I've lived on Germantown Pike in the same house since 1984. And it's all well and good to talk about what a great job Zytel did. I really think she did. And I came to all the meetings. I think the meeting that made me laugh was when one of the township officers, while we were talking about this thing, said he had no idea where Abolition Hall was. And I thought that was very interesting, sitting up there talking about it. I've heard a lot of people say that we're interested in what's going to happen in the future. And we do need to see it. I happen to walk on the property every single night with my dog. I have walked now on that property with 2 dogs, one for 18 years. And I think we're not recognizing how these 2 have maintained that historic building for all these years. Maintained the property, beautifully cut. I don't know how many people have gone down there recently. It's a mess. The township has not done a job to keep it up. The building is suffering. When a building isn't lived in for a while, it falls apart. Roy and Ann did the best job in the world of keeping that thing going. Nancy Corson did the same thing. I think Nancy Corson is being ignored here at this point. She really kept that building as it should be, that whole area. They followed suit. So it's all well and good to say we're going to do something with it, when these 2 have done something with it. There's a big difference between do and done. And I have looked at this since they left. And I miss them because they've always come out and see my dog, and we talk about things. I walk around, and yes, the township in the last week or so has finally cut the grass out around the building, around the Abolition Hall, and a little to the Hovington House. But the rest of the property, except for one little strip, has been totally ignored. Simply by doing the job the township should have done and cut the grass, there would not be the sinkholes. There would not be destroyed property. There would not be grass up to here because they didn't cut the grass. It now looks terrible. Now, if that means open space or whatever you want to call it, it's a sloppy, sloppy mess for our township. Part of the property is on Butler Pike, where the old house was. I forget who owned the house. Hobb House. The Hobb House has been destroyed, taken down, thankfully. It was a mess. As you drive down Butler Pike, look up there. It's a wreck because the township has not paid any attention to it. And I think that's absurd. Yet before that, these 2, you couldn't find a twig on the property. Now, limbs, trees, everything is down. I just think we should remember what the good job these did in keeping this historic building for all these years.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Dana, I appreciate your comment about the tension, and I think it's important, just, history is not always comfortable. And I think it's important to recognize where we are, and acknowledge all the parties, and just we're on a level ground now and moving forward, and that's where we want to be. So I appreciate the comment about the grass and what needs to be done. That further emphasizes the importance of us moving forward and the timeliness of everybody coming together. My action item for tonight, before our next meeting, which is in November, is to have us have some ideas about further public engagement so we can get this process going further. So any comments about public engagement?
Just real quick, Laura.
Yeah.
I think it's September.
September. What did I say?
November.
November is the quarterly board update. Yes, September. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
So,
My name is Louanne Merkel, and I've been in the township since 1993. And I live a stone's throw from Abolition Hall, and feel very attached to it since I'm an artist and a political activist. And I've been working with a group called CARSI. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of it, Colonial Area Anti-Racism and Social Equity Alliance. And I was there at the founding when George Floyd was murdered, and we gathered 300 people on the corner of Joshua and Germantown Pike. We put out the notice at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock we had 300 people there from our township and from neighboring townships. And from that grew this group that's absolutely amazing. And the current work they're engaged in is Code Blue. They're doing a lot of things. They do work around the election, education, anti-racism work. But the thing that has really grabbed people's heart is for homeless folks, two people died in Plymouth Township last year. Not this past winter, but the winter before. And one of our board members decided, not on my watch, and so she's put together a Code Blue and now a Code Red for those in need to get shelter in the worst weather events. At any rate, to me, I see a direct line between Abolition Hall and what CARSI is doing, and would love to see them here and possibly a representative on this steering committee. They're doing the work, they have the vision, and to that point, I don't see any black people here, and so I think to open the door for that would be a really important point. The other thing is, when I did a tour of Abolition Hall, there were people from Johnson House and Germantown Pike, and I have friends who work with Lamont. And I just think, as we build things here, we can go to the other places that have been doing the work and bring in their experience and make those connections.
Can I ask for your name again?
Yeah, it's Lou Ann Merkel.
Thank you.
Luann, that was one of the first things that Darren said when I met him. He spoke about the need that we had sort of a missing element. And I think focusing on the committee and who's up here is not necessarily how I think we should be looking at it. It's who's in this room.
Yep.
Right? It's who's in this room at this meeting, the next meeting, and the meeting after that, and the sessions that we do to try to get a steer for this thing. Because we're hearing everyone, right? And Darren brought up the need to have people who are black here, because this is an experience that is unique to them. So that's something that is definitely on our radar.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I'm honored to be on this committee. I'm not on this committee because I'm a city planner or have any experience in harm. Hopefully it's because I'm reasonable and curious. And so I'm really grateful to all of you for sharing the context and the history. And I hope it doesn't stop at this meeting. Reach out to me, give me more context and history. And I think that we also have a duty to actively reach out to communities of color, to academics who also have context and history, and a real stake in this, to uplift the voices that aren't normally heard. And so that's, I think we're all in sync, but that's definitely my commitment to all of you, is to listen first and to do no harm second.
And I think there's also an obligation on everyone in this room. If you feel strongly about something, bring people who feel the similar way, right? Because we're trying to get, I think, a bearing for this, right? And when we hear these differing opinions, when we hear that the grounds aren't being kept the way that they used to be, right? When we hear about the efforts that you put in keeping these historic properties weather tight, right? That's going to steer how we look at the property. And we're going to take some heat from you, but we're okay with that. right? The goal is for us to work together on this project.
So Luann, if you're still involved or have someone from Carsey, please share the next meeting date. And honestly, tonight, finding out ways that people think would be good to get input from everybody. Whether it's a survey that goes out on the township website to have just people be able to share their comments, attending the next meeting, but we do want to get things, we don't want to always be in dialogue. We want to have some action items moving forward.
Laura, when they were doing the cross-county trail,
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
They did 2 meetings, right? And there was a meeting with, I think, sort of a range of options. And then there was a follow-up meeting which they honed in on the most popular ones. And it was kind of like use pins and color coding. I think they did that with the comp plan as well, right?
Ridge Pike, Monca, the county did for Ridge Pike as well.
It'd be nice if the doors opened an hour early and there was sort of this thing that people could walk around and help. And then we have our meeting and we digest it and we come back and we do it again. Not sure what that looks like. But.
Yes.
Sidelzo, I just want to remind everyone that during the long and drawn-out 4 to 5 years when there were a series of public hearings and public meetings, there were people of color in this room. And they were here because the Friends of Abolition Hall invited them and reached out to them. Michael Cord was in this room and brought carloads of people with him who were referred to as outside agitators, I might point out, by someone associated.
They were outside agitators. They really came one night. They came one time. They all left at the same period, same time, when the man in charge looked at his watch. And we and I talked about it out in the hall.
Sir, can we let her finish, please?
To their home at 9 o'clock at night to go into Abolition Hall. And Roy had come out and said, I live here. This is our private home. They never came back. This is an open meeting. Where is everyone?
Michael Cord and members of his organization were here at least twice. In addition, Connie Swinson.
If you want some time, we'll give you some more time, but let's not interrupt, please.
Connie Swinson, Cornelia Swinson, with whom I have a long-standing relationship because I used to live in Germantown for many years, who is the executive director of the Johnson House, which is a National Historic Landmark on Germantown Avenue in the heart of Germantown, just down the block from Cliveden. She was in this room on several occasions. In addition, we reached out to members of the NAACP, and they were in this room. So making the overture, making the connection did bring people in. And I think that we can reestablish those connections. The Friends of Abolition Hall has a Facebook page and posts regularly. We posted about this meeting tonight. And
how long ago did you post about? Like as soon as it hit the website's a couple weeks?
Actually, I first posted when I saw the legal notice in the Norristown Times Herald, which was before there was anything on the township's page. And then I posted again more recently and then sent out an email to our list. We have a list of about 300 people. Sent out an email last night as a reminder, follow up to an earlier email. And a lot of people actually wrote back to me and said, I'm sorry, I'm out of town, the timing is wrong, I can't be here, including, I might add, a few people whose names might mean something to you. Kathleen Foster, who is a major curator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She apologized for not being here. One of our experts, Bill Bolger, who is a former National Trust for Historic Properties staff member, he apologized for not being able to be here tonight. Michael Cord apologized. David Miller, who I'm sure all of you know. David's here. Oh, David Miller didn't think he'd be able to be here tonight, and he's too modest to say this. But David Miller, who is a member of the Quaker meeting just diagonally across the street, where the funeral service for Thomas Hovenden was held, and his casket was carried by pallbearers from the house to the meeting house. And among those who were the pallbearers was Thomas Akins. David Miller regularly goes over to the Hovenden House and pulls vines off of the building and clips and clears vegetation that's growing where it shouldn't be. David Miller is a saint, truly a saint. And if you were here during the meetings, public meetings and hearings, you would have heard his extraordinarily compelling comments and testimony, unmatched by anyone. So we can re-welcome these people back in who were here. NAACP National Office sent a letter to the township weighing in on the proposed townhouse development. Norristown and Pottstown chapters had representatives here, including a Corson descendant, a man of color. So there are ways to reach out and embrace and invite these people into the discussion. But there are people in the room tonight who we need to hear from, so we should start there. And in terms of vision and use, I will give you my 2 cents. Abolition Hall is an absolute treasure, and we need to make use of that building and the history and the documents and the artifacts that the Wilsons have, which I hope they would make available to the public, and create some sort of interpretive educational museum. That's what needs to happen somewhere in that building. Interpret the history, engage young people especially. We have an extraordinary story to tell, extraordinary, unmatched. I mean, talk about the Malsby family that started with the Underground Railroad, then the Corsons, and then the Hovendens, who many of the models used in the paintings that Thomas Hovenden created, were local people who lived in the village of Coal Point, just down the road. Among the white models who were used are people who grew up in this community whose descendants still live here. And Nancy Corson was kind enough to identify many of the models in Thomas Hovenden's paintings. There is such a rich story to tell. We have to figure out how to tell it. We have to first figure out how do we want to use the 2 primary buildings that we're talking about, Abolition Hall and the main house, Stone Barn. And then once we have a plan for the use, then we have to figure out how do we make these buildings safe, sound, accessible, and ensure that they will be standing for at least another generation. And we can't go after the dollars until we have the vision. The dollars are there. I have spoken to people at the National Trust, at the Secretary of the Interior's office, at PHNC in Harrisburg. They are waiting to hear from Whitemarsh. How are you going to do something creative with these buildings? Come to them with a vision, and the money is there. And I can assure you, our state senator, Vince Hughes, who was in this room during one of the hearings, he came here. He will shake loose big dollars from the state. RACB, LSA, historic tax credits, you name it. He will shake those funds loose, but we have to have the vision first.
So, excuse me, Roy, have you ever put down the history on paper? Have you written anything before it? Is that something that you would consider doing? Because, you know, that did jump out at me, right? Like, you gave a very brief, when we met, you gave a really interesting, but that's something that should get captured. It would be nice if we could capture that as part of this process, perhaps, and get it into just word format.
I'm going to say something, since I've invested a little time here in response.
Can you come up?
And Roy, I want to, David Miller, you had your hand up too, so I want to make sure that you go next.
Let me clarify one thing. As what we was talking about. There was a meeting, and a lot of black folks did come here, and that was great, and I'm sure we can get them back. I would like to say that we were at that meeting, my wife and I, as we were at all those meetings. When we left that meeting, we drove home, it was late, 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. We drove into our driveway, because we lived there. Right behind us came about 10 cars. All the black folks who were at this meeting all drove over to our driveway and came in. Only them, nobody else came. And I'm surprised, I didn't know who they were. All these black folks got out of their cars, and we had a great time for about a half an hour, 45 minutes talking to them. But I will say, in terms of being honest about how things are, the reason they came over is they've been told by persons unknown that they should come over to see the buildings because they were going to be torn down. And I had a talk with them saying, no, what's actually happening here is a developer wants to buy the site. If he buys it, the buildings are going to stay as they are. He wants to put townhouses in the fields. And we walked over and showed them, this is 9 or 10 o'clock at night, it's pitch black. These people had the whole driveway filled with their cars. My wife and I individually were talking to all these people for a long time until finally the tenants came home and they couldn't get in the driveway and they got a little irritated, so the guys all left. But we had a great time with them. I'm sure you could get them back here in a second. They were very interested in the history of it. Because it was night, I didn't take them into the buildings because I wasn't prepared for it, but I'm sure they would have liked to have had a tour, and any other time I would have done that. The only other thing I do want to say here right now in terms of the buildings has nothing to do with any of that. Some of my comments, I was trying to establish the fact that these three buildings, I see them as integrated, and I'm not a decider here, but the integration of these three buildings was both through the Underground Railroad, while the speakers came to the home and spoke in the home, the Hovenden House. Quite likely, people who enslaved people were in wagons in the barn, it's one time or another, because that's how they moved peoples around. They didn't, you didn't walk down the street, so they generally moved people in wagons, so the barn would have been involved. And obviously, Abolition Hall was involved in that activity, as Underground Railway. And Thomas Hovenden was there, and his wife, also a painter. Again, it was an integrated experience. Thomas Hovenden lived in the corner house, he had a gallery in the corner house. He painted in Abolition Hall. His wife painted in Abolition Hall. And they used the barn partly for all the different things he would collect from the community, because he did still lifes of all his paintings before he started painting. But the only point I want to make is, in my mind, all this is an integrated space, and it shouldn't be thought of, in my opinion, as this is the art center, this is a public space, and this is something else. The site was an integrated site.
Thank you, Roy. Sidel, can we hear from Mr. Miller,
I
please?
just want to clarify that at no time did I ever suggest that the buildings were going to be torn
Duly
down.
noted.
And in fact, one of my objectives in leading the Friends of Abolition Hall was to counter the rumors and to make sure that the facts were told.
Thank you.
And Friends of Abolition Hall didn't oppose the construction of townhouses. We wanted a better plan.
Gotcha.
Better plan. Thank you.
David, did you want to talk?
I raised my hand right at the point that you said ideas about public involvement.
Yes,
Could you lift
thank
the
you.
mic up, please?
Yep, can you help
I'm
him
sorry.
with that? That's okay.
Ideas about public involvement. I'm having a hard time sorting that. This, what you all have said tonight, you're putting your hands around the big thing. There's all parts here. This is wonderful. And what y'all, like you just said about it's integrated, I think hold on to that. That's really important. Where my mind was earlier is a little bit smaller than that. Having been at the meeting since about 65, 68, I've just seen this grand vision of the historic district just kind of slide through our fingers as the older folks. So when we talk about public involvement, where I was thinking was starting to get people there to know what's happening. That we don't do this big project and then it just kind of shows up when the big sign goes up and things like that, but we need to bring the public along. And I can start with simple things. I've been meeting people when, I used to see like clearing along the road and picking up trash and all that, and I'm still doing that. So So I'm trying to cut, I come in at 6 in the morning because how do you cut the grass on Butler Pike around the curve with the traffic? So you do it real early. When I get down, slide across and clean up a little bit, get the ivy coming off and just going up the windows and everything. Well, I'm starting to meet other people that are over there cleaning up and trying to keep it dry. Well, perhaps a simple thing to let people know that, yeah, there was all this discussion about it, the township board. Maybe we have a fall cleanup day with public invited, help out, do a little bit of work together. Get people, you know, getting to know one. The other thought I thought was, because the historic knowledge is terrible. I remember that first night. You weren't here, so I was trying to give some sort of historic context to this whole thing. Well, to have the written, but maybe have, you know, give a talk and invite the neighborhood. And what is Abolition Hall? People have forgotten. So have a talk. If Abolition Hall isn't ready for people now, use our gymnasium at the school. Or use the meeting house. Or
the library.
Or the library, yeah, anything. So those are two things I wanted to just lift up. So, and a thought not related to that, but it's just my overarching piece of this. Yeah, there's tension here, and there's hurt. There's definitely hurt, and it's deserved. It's not deserved. What is it? It's real. Well, that's Plymouth Meeting. That's been our history from the very beginning. You can name one big rip in society after another. Friends were not appreciated for not participating in the war. Abolition, we had, there's lots of good stories. The stories of the two brothers that were caught at the Marble Master's house. Well, with Justice of the Peace, he's a Quaker in Plymouth Meeting. He wants to send them back to South. And Ezra Comfort, and dropping the man's name on the corner. They're trying to keep them out, and they forced it to go to the court. Well, it's tearing the meeting apart. Right? When you come up to the 50s, you got the Mary Knowles and the McCarthy era. Oh my gosh! Meeting members would go over to the post office. They closed the post office. Just pull the gate down. One of our members got just let go at your sinus college because we were supporting comics. This is Plymouth Meeting, and we got a lot to learn. But my point to this project is, I look forward to that space being used to address the challenges of today, how we're ripped apart today, how we can't talk to one another today, how we can bring ourselves together, let things go, start over. Yeah, perhaps you can say where it's written, but George Corson and his wife were courageous people. But before people knew him as courageous, they knew him as people of hospitality. They took care of people when they came there. They took care of people whether they were fleeing slavery or whether they were their guests in their house, whether they were black or whether they were white. That's what Abolition Hall has to teach us in the future. So if we can create spaces and things, but starting right now, before we get the money, before we do all the other things, what can we do to begin to put it out there? So there's two small, simple suggestions. Perhaps a cleanup day or something like that in the fall.
Excellent. Thank
Love
you.
that.
Out that on Zoom right now is Emma Lamsansky, noted historian. Emma, thank you so much for being here.
Emma's, well, anybody on Zoom, Emma, if you'd like to talk.
Yeah, just to pick up with what David said, maybe, Roy, instead of putting in words, which is really sometimes tough, we could do like recorded, lecture series, right? Where we meet, we do some volunteer work outside, you give a lecture, we record it, right? And then we could do topics. And it might be a small group at first, but at the very minimum, we're going to start to get this history, right? Which is really important to the whole site. So I think that's a great suggestion.
I'd say that the predecessor, I used to walk before this all got done. We used to live there. Person forward through the house was the predecessor. And he said, I was studying all this stuff in the house and wasn't man, stories and whatnot. I've been on for a long time. He said, we need to be recording you with all these little stops and then these little note cards or what he said, little spots. That was very funny at the time.
It's coming, Roy, just wait.
I think it makes sense, and I also think that everyone in this room, it's incumbent upon you too to take some initiative, right? Like, if we want to do a cleanup, let's push it, right? If we want to do record the history, push it, right? It's all of us together in this room trying to push something, and we all have to kind of take that approach to it.
Emma?
I think Emma wants to speak. Emma, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. It's exciting what you're up to. And I have pointed a few people to you as well, from the HSP and from the Pennsylvania Abolition Society and from the collections at Haverford and Swarthmore. So you may find other people knocking on your doors soon. It is exciting. Pennsylvania Abolition Society is Cindy Little these days. It's an exciting process you're doing.
How are you may I ask you a question?
Cindy.
Emma, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
How are you engaging younger people in this process today, in this history? What are you doing that's work? Is there a way that you could share one way to engage?
I'm doing some things in that I bring them to my classes, and I work with young people who want information about how to do research and what research. But the Haverford and Swarthmore collections are busily indexing and cataloging and making active the 1847 and 1838 census data that brings African-American communities alive. If somebody sends me an email, I'll send you a link to the crowd of people who are doing this. It's a group I don't know well, but I do know their work, and it's really nice.
Thank you.
Send me an email, elapsands@haverford.edu. I'm putting it in the chat.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I have two quick requests for the people in the room. The first is, I would love if you want to make a list of who you think the stakeholders are for this project, and share that with me. I'll stick around after the meeting and I'll give you my email.
With all of us.
Or if there's a general email, or I can pass it along, but just so we don't miss anyone. The other question is, there were a couple people here who spoke about maintenance and the state of the property today. So there's obviously going to be a lot of time that expires between this meeting and whatever this beautiful finished product looks like. I'd love to hear from those of you with the expertise. What should we be worried about the next 30 days, the next 90 days, the next 6 months, so that we can just preserve the status quo? And again, I'll stick around after the meeting. You don't have to give me the laundry list now, but think about that and share it with us so that
Maybe that's something that we can pose for the next meeting to come, so we can all dialogue with that together in September.
Is there a central email address that people can use to get information to the committee? How do you want to? Because the committee's not even listed on the website.
Yeah, so that's part of this meeting, is to figure that out and know what is the best way to have these ideas come in, so we're not having all kinds of tangents happening at one time, but really kind of all leading in the same direction together. I'm looking at Craig for ideas because I don't run the township, but.
Yeah, we can put a group email,
Or
it could come to one person, it could come to myself, and I could share it with the group.
I'm also thinking about like a survey where it's not, because that's a lot of work to have one person constantly monitoring an email and making sure it's getting shared and all of those things, but to have a survey process by which you could put these ideas, like just basic survey to start. I mean, Sidel, you mentioned a lot of people that would have liked to have been here tonight but couldn't. So that could engage a lot of people that would like to say something but aren't able. Dan?
Or if you'd like to set up a form on our site, everybody would submit their emails to me, the form would submit to everybody's emails. So.
I'm not sure I follow. A form?
So there'd be a form on our site. Actually, send Roy an email asking for a copy of the history that we gave today. I want to do a new page on the history of Abolition Hall on our site. And we can put a form on that page where people can submit ideas and submit
A forum, not a form. Gotcha, a forum.
With all due respect, I think that this effort needs to be lodged at the township.
Is there
loud at the township?
Is there a way that the committee could have an email account, like, Abolition Hall Steering Committee at Whitemarsh, and the emails go there, and then, they get.
I guess just who's monitoring that? Like, is it you doing it on Monday and I do it, and how do we compile that? That's why I keep going to a survey where.
So, if an email comes into one email account, it automatically gets distributed to anybody who wants to do it.
And then what do those people do with that?
Then we all get an email and do it once response.
Which means people are going in different tangents.
What if we do this? What if we ask for, when I serve on a board, I always ask committees to give reports a week before the meeting so that I can read that report and I don't have to listen to it at the meeting. I can just ask a question if I have one. Our next meeting is scheduled for sometime in September, right? What if a week before that, we have some sort of, whether it's an email account or a Dropbox or whatever, and people can submit things in writing that we can then have a week to digest. And then when we come here, it will hopefully cut down a little bit on, the shelling that we might feel from everyone having opinions, and we can sort of digest it and say, hey, a couple of ideas were brought up, and we'd like to discuss them, right? And then.
Well, that's what I'm going through, and I think that's where I go to a survey it doesn't have to have a lot of questions. It's just really it could start very basic with what are your ideas? What are your initial thoughts? And then we can dump it into one where we
You're thinking
share.
like a doodle survey, like a survey?
It can be, there's a lot of surveys out there, SurveyMonkey, different ways to compile information and then you can analyze it. Yes?
The Montgomery County Planning Commission about 2 months ago launched a survey with regard to the future use, adaptive use of the Montgomery County Prison on Aaron Street in Park. And they just extended the deadline. It's supposed to be July 25th. They extended it into August. There are about close to 400 responses to date, and they've been promoting it. In fact, I suggested that they go to the municipalities, the county, and the municipalities to promote the survey. So that might be a model. Take a look at it. It's on the engaged.
Can we do that? So then look at something like that, like what platform, Craig, that we use?
It's a very simple survey.
Email address, contact information, your thoughts. Yep.
Very
As a
easy.
start.
Yeah.
As a start. And that can get pushed out, that you can share, to all of the people that you're connected with, David, Dan, the Wilson family, Bill.
I do think it's important that the survey cut off a reasonable amount of time before the meeting.
Agreed.
So that we
Agreed.
have time to digest it, because I think there's going to be a lot of different things that we're going to have to read and reflect on to be able to come in here and have a meaningful
Agree,
meeting.
yeah, but then you're getting it all in one central location, so
Yeah.
not one person is
It's a great
it's going
idea.
in different ways, yeah. Okay, good.
Can I say something that might be unpopular? I think survey, yes, and email. Because if I'm making a survey, I'm sitting here with you, I'm thinking of the questions, I'm thinking of soliciting general opinions of what we want to have done with the property. I'm not necessarily thinking of who do you think the stakeholders are, or what do you think the 30, 90, 180-day plan is just to maintain the property. So I think that there's a need for us to have differing means of communication.
So in an email, are you looking for dialogue?
Not necessarily, but I'm also open to monitoring the email inbox.
But that should be collectively too, so that we're just kind of like going to having that kind of
Central repository.
just central to begin with, and that could be, some of the questions, if you want to pose some of the questions that we'd have on that initially.
The service that good form, and in the form you can have any kind of comment section, ask a specific question, or just a general comment section, allow people to give input that's seemingly random, but doesn't have any direct input to the questions that we're asking.
And it's step one. This is, maybe the next time we decide that we want to shift and go a different direction. Because we're
One
getting,
thing, I caution that
Yeah.
if there is a form or something like that, again, there are sunshine laws that
Correct.
you need to follow, that if you're engaging in dialogues
Yeah.
related to what your mission and goals
Looked
are,
into that.
that needs to be advertised, and the public needs to be aware of that. So it's okay to get the email in.
Talk after.
It's okay to respond individually to people, but you as a group shouldn't be talking or responding as a group about what you're coming back and forth on. So again, you can reach out and tell me what you want to do.
So
but
maybe
don't
more
engage
as a
in that
repository.
dialogue.
Does that make it,
So maybe more as a repository rather than an open dialogue.
that makes our lives easier?
It I think does, and it also
makes
protects us
expectations
from
better,
sunshine
that you won't hear back from us unless it's a meeting.
What if we do this? As a threshold to render an opinion, you have to volunteer 4 hours on site doing cleanup.
Clean up the yard.
Is that a fair threshold?
Can some people bank their
Before you
hours?
submit your survey, you have to show up for 4 hours.
and small print at the bottom.
On a work day. You have to show up if you're going to render an opinion. You have to be vested in it.
Yes.
Yes, you can send a grandson or granddaughter, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. We'll look into getting,
Yeah, I gotta look into
a good way to set that up and get going. So,
I would
in
just
the,
suggest that, because we're talking about specific buildings, that we have brief information about the buildings. Maybe even photographs.
a map would be good. Yep.
Site plan, the briefest of descriptions of each of the buildings. And Monco, the Cape Conco site does have that kind of information on the various buildings. So that's a good model.
Has the Art Center endeavored to do a volunteer day? Has that come up? Have you guys discussed that? Mr. Solicitor, is volunteer day something that,
It certainly can be done, just like it's cleaning up of the township park. Again, I would love to have the Art Center buy-in on that because it is their property as well that they'll be on. I mean, I think it's just, just make sure it's covered by insurance, make sure there's waivers if necessary. But again, it would be just like any other public property cleanup day. So it is public property.
Tom, we do cleanup days.
Yeah, we do.
We have everybody
We do.
sign a waiver
Yeah.
when we do the Wells Street
Yep.
Environs here cleanup day.
Yep.
Do we?
Yes.
Oh, we have that ready. Yeah.
What are you going to clean up? It's not dirt. It's a twig infested limbs down, trees down, long grass, holes in the ground, which present a problem for public walking in, because someone's got to twist their ankle. About the only thing that's been done in 3 signs, I think it's 3, maybe 2, it says no hunting, no digging for no metal detecting. That's it. So you're clean. You need to have all these people come out with a lawnmower. Because the township should have been out the lawn, and it shouldn't be up to Mr. Miller go and pull the weeds off Covington House.
Well, I think
Township owns the property.
I think in fairness to the township, there's the open space portion, and then there's the buildings.
No, they've been cutting bits and pieces of the grass. Have you been down there to walk around?
I have.
When?
2 weeks.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And did they cut the grass at that point?
No.
No, they cut it just the other day. We made one little strip around, and that's it. But the other portions, the entire property behind the houses in Germantown Pike have not been touched.
So
There's sinkholes there, there's cracks in the ground. You can't have homes building up.
Well, I think the sinkhole, I'm a little jaded on the sinkhole discussion because we lost half of Butler Pike and a train rail to a
It's like a
sinkhole.
quarter-mile away from where the property is. But on the property itself, half of the fields that Roy used to rent out to the farmer are now overgrown terribly.
So Bill, I appreciate your comment. So how about we talk
My
about,
comment isn't finished.
oh, I'm sorry.
I asked you, what are you going to clean up?
Well, I think it sounds like we need to look at the maintenance for the lawn, check in on that with the township.
The responsibility of the township.
And can I jump in again? I've lived here my whole life. I grew up on West Valley Green Road. And that state park was cut every week. So it was all beautiful open fields. I landed a helicopter one time, okay? Came under the wires and put it on, not me, but a friend to pick me up. And every time I go by my old house, which the township bought years ago as open space, because I was one of the ones that got flooded. And I agree with you, when we walked the grounds and Roy showed us where the paths were cut, I even mentioned then, we've got to get it cut down, because what happens if you let it grow, those sticks start growing into trees. If you go down West Valley Green Road now, it is just all trees. I mean, it's very pretty, but it was much prettier when it was cut and it was open and people could use it, which is what we're trying to do with this. We want people to come in. We want to bring them in for whatever we're going to do. But we got to cut it first.
And I think what you're saying though is
Everything.
there's a process to
cut
this,
everything.
right? So the township, Parks and Recs, has all these properties to maintain, and they have a budget that is set for them to do this. Properties get added, right? Well, there's open space funds for maintenance of properties, right? But that's something that can totally get looked at, right? That's something I am familiar with, and I think Parks and Recs, from what I've seen, does a great job. I think when a property gets added to their roster, right, we have to also be looking at adding these properties to the roster. What are we doing with their mowing budget? Because mowing all these properties is a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
We can use some of the Act 153 for that. Yeah, so we can, if we need to hire.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
what are you planning to do?
You want to bring that up?
Well, the first thing I plan to do is talk to the Open Space Committee about the funding for the mowing of these properties.
Because there's something coming up.
I think that's valid.
You already know you're going to put the art school up, or the art area is going to come, they go. So there's your first project.
But I think you're missing the point of the volunteer day. If we walk around and pick up sticks, and you get 5 people to show up, and then the next time they bring a friend, the point is that people have.
Walk back there.
May I finish?
Because you haven't walked back there, you haven't done it.
If you don't, please.
Mr. Miller.
You're interrupting everybody, and I don't appreciate
You
it.
cut off Laura and I let it go. All right? But with all due respect, we're donating our time to be here. Okay? And if you don't have people that care for it, volunteer days bring people to care about it. Right? The people that show up, right? And I hope you show up.
I live 3 doors away from.
Good stuff. Right? Whether we pick up sticks or we pick up trash or we just mill around the property eating blackberries as a group of friends, people start to care about it. It creates a thing. Right? And that's what you were talking about, David. And I think we should look into doing that. If we can do a volunteer day, I'll bring my kids, they'll eat blackberries, they'll pick up sticks, and we'll start something because we've got to start getting life back into this, right? You had life there, and it's probably very hard to see it in its current form.
It's very disappointing.
Very disappointing. I agree with you. But we got to breathe life into it, and that's what we're trying to do here today.
So I
Art
hear
Center.
safety first, so we're gonna check with the township on the maintenance and make sure that, you know, just the basic care of, because you don't want people walking about if it isn't safe. And then we can begin to, maybe for the next meeting, plan something, if it's appropriate to do, bring in the idea of networking with one another. Maybe Roy can have a little mini store as we kind of walk outside if the weather's permitting, and just begin to kind of blend the integration aspect. And then,
One other thought is, everyone that's here, we should find a way to tender emails. Because if we're going to do a cleanup day, we're going to send a blast out, right? And then I challenge the Arts Center to match the number of people that we bring to Volunteer Day. All right? Because we are partners in this, Whitemarsh and the Arts Center. And to have that mentality means we got to go tit for tat. We're going to try to do a volunteer day. We're going to send out an email blast, right? And then you guys are going to do the same. You're going to drive your members and your board to show up. And even if they have to sit in a lawn chair and hand out lemonade, right? We've got to start getting people caring about this, right? All of you people are here because you care. Good.
A lot of this, to me, to start out with, my personal opinion, when I was treasurer as well as you have to have a budget to control things. Probably right now, there's really nobody that's established a budget to take care of this property. And Parks and Rec has a whole bunch of stuff they have to do. I think the first thing Jason could do at a meeting one night, or one of the next meetings, and say, I think we need to carve out a little bit of budget here, stick it over here. Sure, that
Let me fast track. Let me fast track that for you. Tom, question for you. Has the addition of this property on Parks and Recs been supplemented with any open space funds for maintenance?
Yes, just so folks understand, the Public Works Department has a grounds crew. The grounds crew of the Public Works Department is responsible for the maintenance of the township playgrounds, parks, open space areas. Okay. That being said, as you're correct, the township has the ability to use Act 164 money or 165 money for the
53.
163. I'll get one. Yeah, I got
still the
9
best,
chances
Tom.
I was going to get. But the point is that that money's there, and the township has been utilizing that on multiple properties within the township to try to get them to, you know, accept better standards, and have been. So just with that, I know we're talking about, you know, mow it, do this. I know I've heard there's been discussions, leave it and let it go to meadow conditions. And, you know, and it was, okay, well, we need to cut a path so that at least people can get, and that's where I believe the path came from. And that's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that currently the Public Works Department and the township are in a agreement with a company that comes in and does the, we'll call it, you know, base maintenance at that area, at that property.
Tom.
So I would think it needs to, whatever the baseline is there is being done needs to be up.
Tom, I have a question for you. Would I be stepping on Parks and Rec's toes if I suggested that we, for this property, because this is the property we're here for, we seek a proposal from a consultant to make a plan of how it could be maintained for future discussion? Would that be stepping on Parks and Rec's toes?
Again, you're not stepping on Parks and Recreation toes. Public Works handles the grounds crew work. So, and I don't oversee, I'm not their direct report. So I don't want to step on their direct report's toes. Now, to me, anything like that is going to help the cause and the overall function and creation of what we're trying to do here, so
That
I
is
can't
part of
see
the
how that
survey.
would be a bad thing.
Is how are we going to use the land?
It's part of the survey, how we're going to use the land, right? And I think there's a long term and a short term, right? Short term, at the Highlands, right, we had one of our board members create a stewardship plan. And I think maybe that's something we talk about at our next meeting, you know, getting someone to do a stewardship plan for the property, giving everyone input on it, and then executing on it, right? And then we could apply to open space for the money to execute on it. And the first step would be, we discuss this idea, we see if everyone likes it. If everyone likes it, we get proposal, and we maybe go to the open space committee and say, we want to hire this consultant to do a stewardship plan for the land. And then we bring it to the public and we talk about it again.
No,
And
we
if the
bring
public-
it to the board of
And
supervisors.
then after that, we would go to the board.
So this is something that we've been talking about, and we did apply for a grant to try and get an independent study of the land. Unfortunately, we were not recipient of the grant, but that's still something we'd like to do. And if we possibly can use open space funds to do that, that would be.
But what do we need right now to get it cut? Because if we don't get it cut down, we're not going to be able to.
We can get it cut, so we have a third-party contract with a different landscaper. Public Works does not do it, Park and Rec does not do it.
Right, because he's saying just the path.
Correct.
And that's
But
not
what the contracts, my understanding was that the township wanted it to go natural except for the paths. So that contract is for you, for this company to come in and do the paths only.
So the recommendation I would make is that someone speaks to Chiron Environmental and see if they would be willing to gratis a stewardship plan in exchange for maintenance of the land, right? Because it would be really nice if we could have something that we could talk about, right? Because a meadow is great when it is a meadow, but we're doing one at the Highlands for the Molten Meadow, and it is a lot of work and a lot of money, right? We might just have to brush hog this for a few years until we get a better funding source, right? But I think making it walkable is important short term.
I agree, and I think what Deb is saying is really important and goes with what you're saying, that if it gets out of control, you know, maybe it's not a meadow, maybe you want agriculture and to farm it, and then you're spending a lot more money to bring it back to what you need it to be. So there needs to be some kind of maintenance, all kinds of hands.
I would suggest that what we used to do is we had on-the-job fields this year, and that's the way that was suggested that you don't do that, you just plant trees and then you never even get them out of there. We used to just have it plowed, which is where the original forklifts came from, and we were plowing for so many years. But if you plow it once in the fall and once in the spring, with very little expense, with all three of those fields, down to just kind of a dirt thing, and give you some time to think about it. At that point, it will be kind of meadowy. But if you don't keep doing it, then it's
What did it cost?
$50, twice a year, $500.
The guy still around?
He would drive down from the farmer down the street.
Maple Farms.
Gary from Maple Acres?
Dad did it when I was there, and he did it. But the thing is, you had to have him, have access to it. And then when you needed to mow around the fields, so now you have this strip of land, it's grass, it's beautiful to walk on, you see the fields, you can transverse the entire property and see what you have, and people will enjoy walking around it. And that'll give you some time just to sit on the fields for now to figure out what you're going to do. If you don't do anything, it's going to be really hard.
I love the idea of making headway.
I agree.
Could we make that our first recommendation to the Board of Supervisors? That we have Gary come and plow the fields?
If you will. If you will.
I'll donate the money. $250, I'm in.
Me too. I'll match you.
Thank you. So, and then the trail mowing, I think, is on the radar, but that's something that would be an appropriate use of open space funding to do that. And maybe that could be a recommendation we can make.
I want to speak to the funding issue. So the open space fund has an open space maintenance fund, separate from the acquisition fund.
Yep,
right.
And that's can be tapped specifically for this purpose.
Yes.
Additionally, the Marble Lane property, my understanding, is still tenant occupied, and the tenant is paying rent to the township. I don't know how much it is, but, you know, I assume that there's some expenses that are being tapped, where that revenue source is being tapped, but, you know, what's in that fund? How much has been collected and where is it going? Where is the Marble Lane rent going at this point? You know, how much is it a month? $1,500? How much is that? I don't know. $1,100 a month. So where's that money going at this point? And then my final comment is, we can't allow ourselves to get lost in the weeds, figuratively and literally, right? You know, yes, we do have to deal with the weed problem. And a meadow is not what we have there now. It's overgrown, invasives. We have to keep in our minds the bigger, longer term picture. So yes, we have to deal with the immediate situation, but let's not focus on that to the exclusion of the bigger responsibility here of how these properties are going to be integrated, used, adapted, and conserved.
Yep. Linda has had her hand up for a long time.
We have to go back to several topics.
And just one more. Does anyone who has not spoken, does anyone want to speak that hasn't yet? Okay.
I want to say something you're going to be happy with. Linda Dahl, when you were talking about like videoing him and, you know, doing something, because obviously a picture's worth 1,000 words. And that has already been done by Friends of Abolition Hall. That hasn't been mentioned. And I'm pretty sure it's on the website, correct? Friends of Abolition Hall website?
Our video?
Yes.
www.abolitionhall.com. It's not a website, it's merely an 11-minute video.
And it tells about Abolition Hall. It's a great video. I volunteer in the school district. I've been doing it for 20 years, tutoring kids. And I've been at the 4-5 school most recently, like the last 10 years. And I'm always trying to encourage people about Abolition Hall. And now that, you know, the public in general is taking more of an interest in diversity and such forth, you know, when it's Black History Month and, you know, Martin Luther King's birthday, they come to me, they wanted to know if they could take tours, if, you know, the school kids could take tours of Abolition Hall, and of course I'm not the one to come to, but what I did provide the school district with, and has become part of the curriculum, is this 11-minute video that Sidel, David Contasta, who is a noted historian in this area, and David Miller all contributed to, and it's a very brief, you know, synopsis of what Abolition Hall is. And it's shown during that time period in all the classrooms in the school. And you know, this is in our local community. These kids need to know this stuff. This is right, you could walk to this, you know? And so anyway, that kind of has already started that process, and I would love to see it continue further in all the schools. And so I suggest that you take a look at that and see how that can be used within the school district and just in the community.
I have one more question. As far as the facilities go, can we get someone to come out and look at the roof? And look, you know, what's the ability of this committee, or if someone was to volunteer, like if a roofing company said, hey, I'll come out there and look at these roofs, and if there's any minor damage that can clearly be mitigated, I'll do it for free. Can we do that? Does anyone know, is that something that has been considered?
Our architects have taken a look at, you know, the buildings through and through. By the next meeting, we will have some loose design plans to share.
And has anyone come out to look at, maybe Roy, were there any roofing issues or anything that we should be addressing short term?
Mostly barn and other than the Abolition Hall, the roofs are broken, the shingle roofs. The oven and house is a tin roof, and it has pole gutters and whatnot. And it needs to be painted.
And it's got a deck.
It's painted, that's all you have to do. You can do it. Once it gets to the point where it's too rusted, you're through.
So the Art Center, I'd like, if you guys can pick up the ball on this one, right? Reach out to me, I'm gonna connect you with my father's roofing business, okay? I will pay the bill for this, if he will come out and paint that tin roof and patch any holes, so that we don't,
I don't think there's any.
There's just
holes.
painting it.
Just needs to be painted.
All
When you
right.
scrape it, you paint it.
All right, that will be a start. So we got at least a little bit of progress we're making here. All right, connect with me.
Tomorrow, Wednesday, when you want to hear from me?
Whenever, tomorrow. Tomorrow's fine. I'll connect you, he'll come out, he'll give a bid, I'll pay the bill. At least that is squared away, all right? And then we'll deal with fields, and then we're gonna keep going, okay? We're gonna make progress here. Going to do it. David?
David?
Just pick up that. This, these three pieces made of bills, because we'll have it over here before we get it in. So, yeah, we're starting through one of the other pieces. For example, had another one get done this month before the rains come.
Gutters.
All the gutters that come down, the gutters should be painted. But the pipe on the ground that needs to go away from the cellar, away from the foundation, most of them are not going to be disconnected. So they need to go there and screw them on. So those little chores, he knows. So get a list of things.
They do an inspection.
Ready? You're gonna become a maintenance guy, all right? So, Roy, do you and Dan talk? Do you and Dan talk? All right. So, would you be kind enough to give him a list of maintenance stuff that should be addressed short term? All right? And then Dan, I've got the roofing. I'm gonna put down $250 to the Art Center, and I'm gonna challenge everyone else, but it's earmarked for the maintenance items that he puts on the list. Is that fair?
It's gonna be expensive to paint a roof.
I have the roof. I'm carrying the roof.
We're not talking hundreds of dollars.
I know. I'm a roofer's kid. I know. All right? But like, this is what these projects take, right? The Karabots Foundation put up a large amount of money to start something and expected us to pick up the rest. And that's half the problem, is that we haven't all taken ownership of this, and we have to start, and it's small. Hugh Moulton is one of the smartest guys I know, and he does a Moulton match all the time. If you do, I do, right? And I think that's really great. I'm not in a position to do that, but I am in a position to start this stuff, right? And can't make the township do the maintenance of the buildings. You guys start to carry that. I'll help you with it.
So, and let's do this methodically too. So the township has been doing inspections. Craig, do you want to?
Yeah, we're down there a lot, weekly, daily, so we can get a list of everything that we have to do. I do think the covenant agreement is big, so we can actually see who's in charge of what and who's gonna take care of everything, but we have a list. The field, I can go down with Public Works and we can knock that out, next week. That's not a big deal. What we're hearing was that's supposed to be natural, so we left it the way it is. So, am I gonna hear from another group after we cut it down that what just happened? It was going so well.
A place to start. If we don't maintain it, then you've got trees, and then it's a lot more expensive to try to go back and do it.
And you're definitely gonna hear from another group.
I know.
Yeah.
So,
They should have come.
And it's ultimately the supervisor's call. We're just here to.
Of course.
We're just here to say.
You're here
we
to
don't
make
think it should be a meadow.
recommendations.
Right.
That's exactly. And part of what I want to hear, or what we want to hear, and you all want to hear, is from the public also in terms of what do they see, not just the buildings as, but what do they see the grounds as? What are different ideas and visions for the grounds? I mean, that's part of this public process, and then getting some feedback either from some sort of a survey, or like this grant that I said that we tried to get to survey the grounds and look at it, because then we're going to have to start really dialing down on what do we want, where's the parking going to be, paths, gravel as opposed to whatever. Darren had brought up in conversation at one point in time, wouldn't it be great to have QR codes that you could go throughout what is this going to start to shape into over time as we go through this process? And these are all important things and things that we want feedback from the community on. And I do agree with the talk that was, we do need to hear from voices of color, for sure. And I'm really looking forward and hoping that the upcoming meetings will bring more and more of those folks to the table.
Is it fair to say that the Art Centers needs to be taking care of the Hovenden House and preventing waste? I mean, isn't that the grant agreement, the Hovenden House?
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? So, I read
the grant agreement say that?
I read the grant agreement.
The grant agreement doesn't get into maintenance.
It doesn't get into the maintenance, but the Hovenden House is for your guys' benefit, right? And so
Kids hanging out there.
Disarray, parties to be publicly accessible and safe for classes and
get it, right? Okay.
Can I ask a question? What is the status of the covenant agreement or operating agreement or operating memo? Because we've been hearing about that for a year and a half, and still there's been nothing's been circulated.
The only thing that I think is outstanding for this covenant agreement is that the Art Center is going to come up with a plan about how they're going to move into that property and use that property.
Into the Hovenden House.
Yes. And their operations and their uses. That plan is going to be attached as Exhibit D. Please see plan. It's done. So it's all about the plan, and that's what Dan mentioned. He has architects and people looking, and he'll have reports back. So
we expect to share at least 5 if not 4 days.
But as far as the other, who's going to be responsible for what, who's going to pay for what, we've reached agreements on that. It really is just incorporating that plan.
So, specifically with regard to the undertaking that Art Center is pursuing with its architect, when I saw the scope of service, which goes back some time, so perhaps it's changed, it was minimal. It was about $8,000 worth of work to look at the main house and Abolition Hall and address the required improvements to 3 rooms. One is a ceramic studio, one is a painting studio, and one has office space, administrative space in those 2 buildings. Nothing about Hovenden House. Now, perhaps it's changed since then, but I guess what I would like to hear from the Art Center is what is it that their architect is working on, and what will she produce?
It's applied for all 3 buildings.
For all 3?
All 3 buildings. It's a phased plan with accessibility and safety being top concern. The initial 2 studios will be in the garage of the main house, the stone barn, and the basement of the low level because those are the most accessible. I will share it with you, share it available. No problem.
Excuse me, Dan, you said it'll be available for the next meeting. Are we talking 2 more months?
I mean, a lot of architectural drawings. I'll see what I can get when I can get it.
We're all on the same page, and we're here to kickstart this.
I'm not holding anything back from you as soon as it's available.
Okay, my foot's right on you, babe.
Okay.
But so that plan does not, in this phase, address Hovenden House, is that correct?
Yeah, because you can't.
Okay.
There's so many structural things that need to happen before it actually gets updated.
So I just think it's important that the committee understand the scope of service and what it is that the architect will be producing, because it's not consistent with this covenant agreement that Mr. Walker has referenced, which says the covenant agreement cannot be completed until they have a plan for the art center to address the Hubbard House, but that's not.
No, it's a plan to get us into and utilizing the space.
Which space though, Dan?
Right now, it's going to be the lower level of Abolition Hall and the garage and the barn because those are the most accessible.
Could you be?
Yeah, so I'm like
Could you be
confused here.
convinced to maybe streamline the initial, the initial planning? Could you focus on just how could you use Hovenden House?
Because there were renters there just before.
Right.
Like,
Have you been in the basement?
Yes.
Hovenden House is cool.
Yeah, Roy toured us through the house.
No, we didn't go to
But
the
why are you in the basement?
Did you go?
Tree trunks. It's not. It was lived in by 3 people. It's not possible. The staircases are not up to code. There's no accessibility. The cost to make that usable far exceeds what it would take to.
For what purpose of it? For admin or for, like, are you talking like classes or just administrative even? Like, what about just admin?
At admin, we do our conversations with the board of supervisors. We can be using the means for Hovenden House, not Hovenden House, of Stone Barn initially until
So this is helpful to kind of hear because that seems conflicting with what the covenant agreement.
That's a temporary thing.
For how long is temporary?
I mean, the idea that the township's trying to get them onto the property and trying to get them to use the property.
So that has, I mean, that's good that's coming out right now is to make it clear to everybody because we're talking about covenant agreement, it's talking about Hovenden House, but that's not really what we're talking about, so it's very confusing.
And I don't really want to say this because it's already 9:08. But having run a nonprofit and been around a lot of nonprofits, I don't know many wealthy people who could undertake these kinds of repairs. I don't know how a nonprofit can be expected to do that too, which isn't any judgment on you guys. It's just the reality that maybe we're expecting or dreaming about things that can't really happen.
The architect that we're working with has been doing historic renovations all around the city, many of which you're very familiar with, and she works with nonprofits specifically, and has deep knowledge of how we can get access to funding.
But here's my
question. What we usually typically do, but
here's my question though: why go so far afield that like the Hovenden House, right, was in the grant agreement was to be set up for you guys to use as an art studio, right? And yes, there might be issues with the basement, structural, right? Like we just had to put steel at the Highlands. I totally get that.
Probably yeah.
But right, for a foundation that has not been through this yet, I would strongly urge you to focus on the Hovenden House because I went through the Abolition Hall and the main house, okay? And I'm a guy who's in construction. I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the property. Not by the disrepair, but by the magnitude. Everything is big. Is that fair, Roy? Everything is big. The ceilings are tall.
It was a barn.
The beams are big, right? Hovenden House was a beautiful home on the first floor, which can have offices above, right? And can be structurally repaired for a whole lot less. And I really think that
not the information we're getting from our architect, and that's not more than happy to meet with you guys as an architect, and we can have this discussion a little further.
The timing of that too, if our goal as partners with the township is to get out of our existing property in that city road as quickly as possible. It's already been this long. So we're talking about
the grant agreement or just
quickly and effectively moving all of our operations into this property. And the best way that we can do that right now is in the garage underneath the barn.
But that doesn't.
But is
go,
that part
that's not
of
what the
the
grant
agreement?
agreement? The grant agreement here says the Art Center will use the Hovenden House as its primary location for administrative offices, classes, and gallery space. And then the main house is something that is a future thing that's a partnership, right? That's what this grant agreement says. And I strongly urge that you take a look at this. The Hovenden House is there, right? Like, I'm not sure why Abolition Hall is being looked at when the Hovenden Hall is only top floor. Yeah, but the main house is used by the Partnership for Public Meeting Space and for Educational and Art Center programs. But Art Center programs are programs. Hovenden House is for you to use office, classes, and gallery space.
In order for us to get into Hovenden House, it's going to take a long time. So if we want to just keep existing in our current property for years, I don't think that's what the township wants. So as much as you are reading that, I think that's not what the township.
Well, I think so. Obviously, that's why there's contracts, right? Because when there's misunderstandings or misinterpretations or expectations aren't aligned, we have to go back to these documents. So we're only here to advise the Board of Supervisors, but it sounds like there needs to be a meeting of the minds about what the steps are.
John, we're in meetings, so is Jason, and you and so.
Well, I mean, then that's the issue that's holding it up, is that there needs to be a plan. The township needs to make sure that it's a realistic, acceptable plan. Once we can agree to that plan, it then becomes part of the covenant that we were agreeing to.
Yeah, but
the plan
is necessary.
But the covenant right now does state that, and again, this is just draft language, but I think it was presented by the Art Center's attorney, that the declarants, which are both people, acknowledge that as part of the first phase of the plan involves the Art Center moving its current operations from its current location to the property in a timely manner as set forward in the plan. So again, that I think it's anticipated.
Which he has set forward in the grant agreement.
Well, again, the grant agreement doesn't reference timing and when that would happen, and I think that's, again, what we're trying to do is to establish an agreeable timeline, realistic timeline that's acceptable to the Karabots as well, that we can all agree to incorporate and say, okay, well, this is what you're agreeing to do. Let's move forward with that plan. And again,
it's really critical that the next meeting, I mean, that's like Deb said, it's 2 months out, and we've already been waiting for a long time for, the plan. So, it is a huge undertaking. There needs to be repairs, so there needs to be the next step of like, what are the repairs? How are we going to go about that? And what is that going to look like? But it seems like it's so big that it's frozen the next step from happening, and we need to take the next step.
That's the process of this one.
But it has to go to the next step now.
When did the clock start ticking? Like when was it signed and like did this whole process start?
August of 20.
When was the grant agreement?
Yes.
The grant agreement was executed prior to the agreement of sale, August 24th, 2022.
And when do you guys think that, like, I know stuff gets signed and people then talk about it and then things get started. So
We've been working on it until last month. I think we had meetings.
Well, so again, we're talking about two different things. The grant agreement is done.
Right.
It's executed. The covenant.
Yeah, because John, we could lose the funding, right? If this is not
The Karabots
on time.
The Karabots are expecting that the property is going to be used for educational resources and accessible to underserved children residing in low-income areas. That's why they gave the money.
And at the very end
they want to
of the
see the
grant
property
agreement-
used for the public purposes that they donated the money for.
The end of the grant agreement also stipulates stewardship and reporting. So the end of the fiscal year, the Township and Art Center, beginning after the partnership purchase of the property, we have to have a report. They want to know what's happening, every year. So it's already the end of July. So I'm just getting really, I don't want this to fall apart. Yeah, and it's been 2 years just about now.
So do I understand we're waiting for your architecture? Can we do it on just the corner building and not worry about the other two buildings so we can get you in there?
do it one step
We
at a time.
can't start, we don't have the funds to be a lot more expensive, give a lot more time. We have the housing house, corner building, versus trying to get us in there as quickly as possible, which is with Bob and Karabots.
It's one or the other, yeah.
It's really
Either
one or
start
the other.
programming as quickly as possible, or go into the Hubbard house that's going to be a long time.
A lot more time, a lot more.
So
But we don't know that data. I guess that's where I'm stuck, is I'm going by what you're saying. We don't have the plan in place. And that's what we need to have to be able to.
We need something to say the beams are no good, that you can't move in. Karabots are leaning on the township
They're already at the bottom.
because nothing has happened. That's the problem. And they could always walk away.
Start the program for them. Because then
board of working people won't have full-time jobs, and
Like us.
Dan, how many people are on your board?
right now, like,
Okay.
My pleasure. As an artist, I'm not that familiar with the arts and something but I'm an artist. I've been in a lot of art schools and places. And art studios can be really interesting, vibrant, exciting places. I think with this site, a bit about the outside, what the buildings need is a little bit of excitement right now. And I understand part of what you're saying about the government house. It might be to the advantage of everybody to get something going on in some of these other buildings, just to get some critical mass of excitement going on, instead of having a bunch of empty buildings, which is what they are now. Nothing going on at all. You need some kids in there throwing wheels and painting, and that's got to take place in the first floor of Abolition Hall, which, not my suggestion, but it is already wired for 220. It's fairly easy to throw a few wheels and kilns in there and get moving. And it's safe. You've got a concrete floor. You can't do that in another house. And, the first floor, as the barn, the first floor of the Malsby barn, it's like this giant space. You could have a gigantic painting studio in there temporarily. I don't know about whether it should be there permanently. It's up to you guys, but I think he's starting to be happening in there. And he's getting into these other two buildings, which are easy to work with. They have light, they have electricity. They are relatively safe. Frankly, they're very safe. But that may be a little bit questionable, because the rest of it, there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing like wrong with the Hubbard house either, except the first floor. It's it's old. It's very old. But I think what you need is get something in one of these houses is doing something.
And are you prepared to move into one of them? How soon?
once the work is done, it's not working directly during this.
So, can you give me an idea of what work would need to be done?
Well, to make the garage function studios can take a little bit more than getting go for Abolition Hall done, but I don't know.
But that's even part of a plan.
Yeah.
Like, that's putting it down on paper so we collectively know, like, that's what we're looking for. It's just like, I don't know what, you want to do.
I don't have the information right now, and relying on people smarter than me, we're about.
We're just frustrated that it's been 2 years where
You're getting shelled and you're handling it pretty well, okay? We're not here to attack you. We're here to try to help you guys through this, all right? You're an artist. You guys see things a certain way, okay? I can't do that. I can't see things the way you guys see things and make art. Do you have a vision in your head when you close your eyes of what this place can be? Can you write that down? Like, speak it into a recorder. That's how you start your plan. It starts in your guys' head as to what you want to do to make this place incredible. That's the plan.
We're telling you our architect is.
No, it's not, but it's not the architect. The architect.
We have talked about it, we have looked at it, but there's a difference between what my brain can imagine and what's going to actually be feasible.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of being an artist. All you have to do is spit out what's in your brain, and then people who are talented with construction and finance and fundraising and legal documents will help. Right? It's about spitting out a vision for this.
Yeah.
That starts a plan.
Because I just don't want to put the cart before the horse. Like, I think this is getting big. So, like, and it's late. It's already 9:20. If we can begin to close this with some action items. So to recap, we are getting information from the township on the maintenance plan with Public Works. We are going to get information about the survey that was done, Monco,
survey, right.
for the jail in Norristown, the historic jail.
Yep.
And we'll get information on the status of the maintenance funds to use for that. And then if we can have.
Contact that about the roof. And,
But before we do the roofing again, like Roy, could you get a punch list of things like that David was saying are your go-to yearly things? Maybe throw in Gary's contact information. And then Craig, if we can have some combination with the Public Works of, if we're going there inspecting all the time, let's compile this so that we have, for the next meeting, a list of things that are either done already, like mowing, and plans that need to be done, like gutters and roof and some of those bigger maintenance. And then the architectural design, the plan, like if it's so big, I know you said it was all 3 properties. If we can, again, phase this like we talked about before and start with one and have it be, planned for the next meeting to come presenting
I've
for.
already said it, but in the next meeting, have a presentation and a vision for you guys to share.
Perfect.
We work with our teachers, we work with our board, we work with our architects, we work with construction professionals and engineers to try to figure out which the best, easiest, most direct way.
Perfect.
To meet these changes.
Thank you.
And that's part of the stuff that has taken so long. All the experts that we had pulled in because we're artists. We're not construction people or engineers. And there's a lot of work that, there's a lot of work that we need to look at. When I call around in the basement and I see there's, tree limbs or logs holding up the floor.
Listen, there's logs holding up the mill. That's how they built in the old days.
That's right. That was the house.
Craig.
But there's also a 30-degree slope on the floor.
So hold on, Sidell. We want to just keep moving.
I stand by the roofing offer, right? We have to add the township as additional insured, but it would be nice if maybe like we could figure out a way where if volunteers are willing to step up and bite off little pieces of this, maybe that's the action. Maybe that's the action item.
Begin to cross things off.
If volunteers are willing to commit to it, maybe we need to have a process so that there's a way that they can actually engage in that.
Laura.
Yeah.
If,
Yes. Tom.
If I can real quick, and I know it's late, but I agree with Craig on the maintenance part of things. I also think the volunteer efforts is something that can get put together and be successful. I think one thing that's very, very, very important, and everyone's pushing and excited for like what I'll call a win to get people excited and at the site. But I think the infrastructure in the site is not in the condition of what would be a public park, a commercial park. It was a wonderful homestead for the Wilsons, but if you have 5-6 cars in there, there's pretty good chance somebody's going to back into something or more. Like it's not really safe. Hopefully it can be. The ingress and egress, the site distances, are very difficult and challenging pulling out onto Butler. Maybe, might have to address some vegetation for better site distances and, some gravel in the parking lots with car stops. So like it's an established parking lot. So, because again, you're going from a residential property to a commercial park. And even to say to Dan or the Art Center or, Park and Rec or whoever to, hey, go do this over there. That's great. There's not really functional parking or exterior grounds to, you stick down. If we had a parking lot like that, you put down a few picnic tables and all of a sudden, hey, there's a reason to go there. Yeah, I can go and have lunch. It's nice. It's safe. I'm in and out. That's pretty low-hanging fruit for an easy victory to gain some success. And so, that little bit of momentum, at least in the exterior part of what we're talking about, while the interiors are being vetted and developed. But, encouraging and wanting to get, hey, we got to get all these people there. Well, we need to also get them there safely and have proper ingress and egress. And just, I think that's something important for this committee to be aware of, because it's not just something I'm mentioning. I know this is a discussion I've had with the chief and also with Jack in Public Works, but putting down a gravel parking lot that doesn't need to be like a permanent thing. It could be moved when there's a site plan, but at least it would be safe in the interim, with some picnic tables and a trash can, and our guys swing around and pick up the trash. And then suddenly there is more of an exterior park versus somebody pulling in now that's kind of probably like, is this the right place? What am I allowed to do? Where am I allowed to go?
Thanks, Tom. Yes, no,
I'd like to make a suggestion in terms of the next meeting, and that is that this committee and/or the township board of supervisors invite the art center's architect to speak directly here, rather than.
Well, I posed that to Dan, if that's possible. That would be possible.
Okay. And what I'd like to hear is not, I guess I'd like to start with the art center's vision and then the architect's interpretation and how she's moving forward to help them realize that vision. Those would be the two.
Let me play devil's advocate. Why doesn't the art center have the plan for this agreement, right? Like, guys, that is something that I think is very troubling for me, that there's no plan yet that has to get done. Like, to me, all these discussions are very theoretical without this agreement signed.
Yeah, and the architectural design doesn't need to be done before the plan.
It doesn't need to be done before the plan, but in order for us to visualize what even makes sense for us, what spaces can be used for, like you were saying, for wheels for painting, that we needed to do the legwork to understand.
Don't get hung up on perfect.
That's right, so we can offer
like you're saying, and
amendments.
That's the agreement.
Don't get hung up on perfect. Nobody's out to get you guys. We're like, get it down.
But one of our biggest challenges is money. So we are looking at how can we do this in a cost-effective manner.
You guys slam the keyboard. Just start putting it out there.
Well, but we got to do it, get little, your plan, and it's going to evolve. Like, your plan is going to change. It's not static.
Draft the plan and make it a draft and send it to 10 people whose opinion you respect, and ask them for feedback, and they will send you back red lines and you improve it. And like, that's how these things get done. You put it down on paper and you say, listen, don't be too critical. I'm just trying to get my plan out there. And then send it to your board and have them redline it, mark it up. That's how, that is this thing.
Can we adjourn?
Yep, we can. And so the next meeting is September 30th at 7 p.m. here in the Township Building and also on Zoom. And we're going to get some questions together for the survey and present it and get that out. And thank you, everybody, for coming. We are adjourned.